In the rolling hills of Willow Creek, a planned community just outside Colorado Springs, life was supposed to be peaceful. Tree-lined streets, perfectly manicured lawns, and the promise of safety behind wrought iron gates. That's what drew Ethan Brooks and his family here 2 years ago. Ethan, a retired Navy SEAL with 15 years of service, had traded combat zones for backyard barbecues and school runs. His wife, Sarah, taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. Their 8-year-old daughter, Lily, was the bright center of their world. Curious, fearless, and always sketching birds in her notebook. But peace, Ethan would later learn, is sometimes just a thin coat of paint over something rotten. Started small. The Willow Creek Homeowners Association, known locally as the WCHOA, was infamous for its strict rules. No visible trash cans before 7 p.m. No basketball hoops on driveways. Flowers had to match the approved color palette. Ethan had mostly ignored the monthly newsletters and petty fines. He paid what he owed and focused on his family. Until the day Lily's treehouse became the problem. Lily had built it with her father over the summer. Nothing fancy, just a simple wooden platform nestled in the old oak at the back of their property. They added a rope ladder and a small flag that read Lily's Lookout. It was her sanctuary, where she watched clouds and planned adventures. The HOA board decided the treehouse violated aesthetic standards and structural safety codes. They issued a warning, then a fine, then a demand for immediate removal. Ethan politely explained that the treehouse was entirely on his private property and well within county building guidelines. He provided the necessary permits. The board responded by doubling the fines and sending increasingly aggressive letters. Sarah tried reasoning with them at a community meeting. She was shouted down. Then came the morning that changed everything. It was a crisp Saturday in late September. Ethan was in the garage organizing tools when he heard the unfamiliar crunch of tires on gravel. 3 black SUVs with flashing yellow lights pulled up in front of the house. On their doors were decals that read, WCHOA Enforcement Division. The men who stepped out wore dark tactical-style uniforms, badges, and utility belts. They looked official until you looked closer. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag and walked out to meet them. Lily peeked from behind the screen door, clutching her sketchbook. Mr. Brooks, the lead man called out. He was stocky mid-40s, with a shaved head and a name tag that read Captain R. Harlan. We're here on official HOA business. We have a court order to remove the unauthorized structure and address the ongoing child endangerment situation. Ethan's jaw tightened. Child endangerment. Harlan held up a clipboard. Your daughter has been observed playing in an unsafe, unpermitted structure. Multiple complaints. We're taking her into temporary protective custody pending a welfare check. The words hit like a slap. 2 other men moved toward the porch. One reached for Lily's arm. Everything inside Ethan went still, the same calm he'd felt before missions in hostile territory. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was his home. Take one more step toward my daughter, Ethan said quietly, and this ends very badly for you. Harlan smirked. We have authority here, Mr. Brooks. You can't stop us. Step aside. What followed was captured on Ethan's security cameras, doorbell cam, and Sarah's phone. Footage that would later go viral. Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't throw punches. He simply positioned himself between the men and his daughter. Gentlemen, he said, his tone measured and professional, you are trespassing on private property. You are not law enforcement. Those badges are fake. Those uniforms are costumes. And if you attempt to kidnap my child, I will treat it as exactly that. Harlan laughed. Kidnap. We're HOA officers. We have the power to enforce community standards, including child safety. The board voted unanimously. One of the younger men lunged forward, trying to grab Lily, who screamed and ran behind her father. Ethan moved with practiced efficiency. He didn't strike. He simply blocked, redirected the man's momentum, and pinned his arm behind his back in one fluid motion, forcing him to his knees without injury. Stay down, Ethan commanded calmly. Sarah, call the real police. Now. Chaos erupted. The other two men hesitated. Harlan pulled out a phone, shouting that they had backup coming. But Ethan had already assessed the situation. No real weapons. No body cameras. No jurisdiction. These were bluffing bullies playing dress-up. Within minutes, 2 county sheriff's deputies arrived, called not just by Sarah, but by 3 neighbors who had witnessed the confrontation from across the street. The deputies took one look at the scene and ordered the HOA men to stand down. Harlan tried to argue, waving his fake court order. The lead deputy examined it for 10 seconds and handed it back. This is a fake document. You're under arrest for impersonating law enforcement, trespassing, and attempted kidnapping. Handcuffs clicked. The 3 men were loaded into patrol cars while neighbors gathered, phones out, recording everything. But Ethan knew this wasn't over. The HOA board had gone too far, and powerful people were involved. That evening, after Lily was tucked into bed with extra stories and hot cocoa, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with Sarah. The weight of what almost happened settled over them. I thought we moved here for safety, Sarah whispered, tears in her eyes. Ethan placed his hand over hers. We did. But safety isn't given. Sometimes it has to be defended. The next morning, Ethan began his counteroffensive. He wasn't interested in revenge. He wanted justice and protection for every family in Willow Creek. Using skills honed through years of intelligence work, he started digging. Public records, financial filings, meeting minutes. He discovered that Captain Harlan was actually Richard Harlan, a former mall security guard with a history of aggressive behavior. The other 2 men were his cousins, hired by the HOA board at inflated rates. The board president, Margaret Voss, had pushed the aggressive tactics after several residents challenged her rules. Worse, the HOA had been using intimidation tactics for years, fining families into submission, threatening child services calls over minor disputes. They had created their own fake enforcement unit to scare people into compliance. Ethan compiled everything. He reached out to a respected local investigative journalist, Elena Ramirez. She had a reputation for uncovering corruption in planned communities. Together they built an airtight case. 2 weeks later, Elena's story broke. Inside Willow Creek, how an HOA created its own fake police force. The article included the security footage, financial records showing misused homeowner dues, and interviews with other intimidated families. Spread like wildfire. National news picked it up. Within days, the Colorado Attorney General's office opened an investigation. The confrontation at the next HOA meeting was legendary. The community center was packed. Margaret Voss sat at the head table, looking pale. Ethan stood up when it was time for public comments. He didn't shout. He spoke with the quiet authority of a man who had faced real enemies and chosen to build a better life. My daughter is not a pawn in your power games, he said. No child in this community is. You crossed a line when you sent armed impostors to my home. Today that ends. He presented evidence packet after evidence packet. Residents who had been silent for years began sharing their own stories. One mother described how they threatened to call CPS because her son had a lemonade stand. An elderly couple spoke about losing their life savings fighting frivolous lawsuits. The board tried to adjourn. The community wouldn't let them. By the end of the meeting, 3 board members resigned on the spot. Margaret Voss was removed by emergency vote. An independent audit was demanded. In the months that followed, real change came. The fake enforcement division was disbanded. New rules limited HOA power and required transparency. Families who had been bullied received refunds. Richard Harlan and his associates faced criminal charges. On a warm spring afternoon 6 months later, Ethan sat on the back porch watching Lily climb her treehouse. The oak tree's leaves rustled in the breeze. Sarah brought out lemonade and joined them. You know, Ethan said, putting an arm around his wife, I spent years protecting strangers on the other side of the world. Never thought I'd have to do it right here in my own backyard. Lily looked up from her sketchbook. Daddy, are the bad men gone? They're gone, sweetheart, he replied. And they're not coming back. She smiled and went back to drawing. A picture of her father standing tall in front of their house, the American flag waving behind him. Ethan Brooks had faced down enemies in deserts and mountains. But nothing compared to the fire that burned when someone threatened his little girl. He didn't need to crawl through mud or kick down doors this time. He used discipline, intelligence, patience, and the truth. And the fake cops. They crawled back home, stripped of their costumes and their power, never to play their dangerous game again. In Willow Creek, the trees grew a little taller, the children played a little louder, and families remembered that sometimes the greatest warriors are the ones who simply refuse to let bullies win.